Budget Review Show. I'm your host, Eric Smith, and today I'm talking about Desolation by Kristopher Rufty. This is from Sam Hain and just came out in January, I believe. And in Desolation, wow. The main character is Grant Marlowe, and he's an alcoholic lawyer. And right at the beginning of the story, Grant is involved in a devastating accident, and he moves on with his life, stops drinking, and his whole family is affected by this, so he's trying to put his family back together. So it's a couple years after the accident, and it's Christmas. So he takes his family up to their cabin in the woods, and he's kind of hoping they'll get snowed in so that they're forced to work through all their issues. But what Grant doesn't know is the other person most affected by this devastating accident, a gentleman by the name of Dennis Hinshaw, who, this isn't really a spoiler because it's in the first few pages of the book. Dennis loses his entire family, his wife, his son, his unborn daughter. Well, Dennis shows up at the cabin as well, seeking revenge. He wants to make Grant suffer for what he did. And that's the setup for this devastating story. This is an emotionally draining tale of revenge and possibly redemption, if that's even possible. I have some very personal feelings regarding alcoholics and some of the problems they cause. So I'm not that sympathetic towards Grant Marlowe. He's a well-written character. They're all well-written characters. And you have Grant, obviously. I already said that. His wife, Marion, who, she still loves her husband, but before this accident, Grant was lying about his drinking. And so she not only has to deal with what happened, but she has to deal with the fact that, her husband was lying to her. And it's really put an incredible strain on their marriage. Again, this is why Grant wants to put things back together. But she's a really well-drawn character. We get to know everybody pretty well. There's Kara, Grant's daughter, who I think she's the closest to her father. I think she's the first to have forgiven him, and she really wants him to be able to pull everything together. Bobby, Grant's son, is the polar opposite. He's punishing his father, essentially. But they all have very clear, distinct, well-crafted personalities. Dennis, a horribly tragic figure, and on the one hand, I agree, that Grant needs to be punished for what happened, more so than the actual punishment he received. So I can see Dennis's viewpoint. He doesn't feel that Grant has suffered enough, and you can get behind him up to a point, but he's obviously been so incredibly damaged by what happens, and he goes way too far, and brings in people that shouldn't be involved into his revenge scheme. Then there's some other people in there. You've got Edgar, who is the handyman who takes care of the Marlowe's cabin when they're not there. So he's around. and you have Sonia, who is Dennis's psychiatrist, um, and she's very worried about Dennis and how far he might go, so she gets involved. Um, and a few other people. I don't need to mention everybody, but all of them very, very well crafted characters, which is incredibly important, especially in a story like this, where you have to feel for everybody. You have to have empathy for the most part. Again, just personally, I don't have a lot of empathy for Grant Marlowe, um, but I certainly have plenty for everybody else in the story. And that just makes what happens just so much more devastating. This is, as I said, a really gut wrenching story. It's very powerful. Um, and it's something that could have been simply gratuitous, uh, because there is plenty of violence in this, um, and it could have been just, here's some more violence, here's some more violence, oh look what Dennis has done now, look what this person has done, look what that person has done. But because it's so well made, the characters are so well drawn, um, you really feel for what's going on. Uh, I can't imagine anyone not having sympathy for Dennis or sympathy for most of the other the characters that just get caught up in this whole thing that spirals out of control. Um, some sympathy for Dennis. As I said, he does take things a little too far. I mean, you have to be sympathetic for his situation. You don't have to necessarily agree with what that situation leads to. Um, so uh, the way the story unfolds is really well done. The pacing is really nice. We spend the first bit of the book getting to know these people, which is important, but it doesn't slow anything down. And as we get to know the Marlowes and their family dynamics and their character, this is interspersed a bit with some stuff with Dennis, in the form of what starts out as letters that he's writing to his dead wife, but become journal entries. Um, and so it's almost like flashbacks, sort of, because uh, it doesn't actually go back and show us anything. But as we're getting to know the Marlowes in the day or so leading up to them going on this getaway to their cabin, which is all taking place, let's say December 2015. Um, as I said, it's intercut with these things from Dennis, and it actually goes back. So the first letter that Dennis has written to his deceased wife goes back to sometime shortly after uh, the accident. Um, don't know specifically when. Maybe it's about halfway between the accident and the setting of the actual story itself. So not really flashbacks, but just little peeks at where Dennis was then and how he gets to where he is at the time of the story. So that's a nice little glimpse into his psyche. Uh, and the so it unfolds very nicely, and the violence is very graphic but not gratuitous, I guess, um, is the way I should put it. I mean, there's a reason for pretty much everything that happens. It's not just there for, oh, here's another violent scene. It's Most of it is part of the plan. As I said, things spiral, so not everything goes according to plan. Excuse me. There is one particular scene that to me felt a little cliched. I won't tell you specifically what it is. It does not involve Grant and his family and Dennis. It involves a couple of the other characters, um, and it just sort of, I mean, I understand why it's there, but what happens in the scene, um, it's one of those sort of cliched coincidences, I suppose, is the best way to put it. Um, and it's something that to me seems a little overused sometimes. Um, so not the greatest scene in my opinion, but that's one drop of disappointment in the ocean of just an amazingly well written gut punch of a story. Um, just Kristopher Rufty quickly becoming another one of those authors that I absolutely have to read. Uh, I've reviewed some of his other stuff before, and I really enjoyed it. Um, but I think this one just really tops them. At least what I've read. I haven't read everything that he's written, uh, but man, I don't know where he's going to go from here. um, and this is a completely human horror. Uh, excuse me. As much as I like supernatural horror and monster stories and creature features, sometimes it's the human horror that's the most devastating, um, and the most horrific. I suppose most of the time, all the time, it's the human horror that's that way because it's it's real. If you know what I'm saying. Obviously, it's a work of fiction, but it could happen. It does happen. Um, as opposed to vampires and werewolves and lurkers and such. Um, so, just, I can't recommend this enough, which I suppose leads to my rating. Um, and this one, if you want to know why I chose to draw what I drew, you're going to have to read the book, which you should read anyway. But I give it, let's see, my lighting isn't, there we go. 4.5 out of 5 tree stumps with a double bladed axe stuck in it. So yeah, 4.5 out of 5. Just amazing. Excuse me, that was sneezy. Um, so 4.5 out of 5 tree stumps with an axe in it. I think not 5 out of 5 because of that one scene. Um, but again, that was such a little thing. It doesn't spoil the rest of the book. Just absolutely amazing. Another one of those that, I've said this in quite a few reviews for different authors, but this is the book that should put Kristopher Rufty on the map. Um, it's it's uh, it's up there with books like Misery, um, or I can't think of another one off the top of my head, but it did remind me, just because of the isolation and the snow and everything, gave me that Misery kind of feel, and I certainly think it's it's up there with the characterization and the the story itself and just the emotional impact of what's going on. So I suppose that's all I have to say about Desolation at this point. Um, I will have links for the book in the description below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put them in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. So if you want to know anything more specific, if you want to know what the scene was that um, had me a little disappointed, just ask me down in the comments. I'll tell you. Um, and please like, share, and subscribe. Seriously, pick up Desolation. Amazing story. And that's it. So this has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith, and until next time, read more books.